With Wizards of the Coast releasing a brand new Borderlands box set, I think it's the right time to take a step back and talk about that adventure that put the Borderlands on the map in the first place. The original, Keep on the Borderlands, written by Gygax. Now, this first module, well, it came out in 1979, and for a whole generation of players, it wasn't just another adventure. It was the adventure. It was packed right into the basic D&D box set, which meant for countless new players, this was their very first dungeon crawl, their first wilderness trek, their first taste of what it meant and what Dungeons and Dragons could be. What's wild is just how simple it looks at first glance. A keep, a dangerous frontier, and some caves filled with monsters, and that's it. But when you dig in, it's doing something way bigger. It's teaching brand new players how to play this game. And at the same time, it's teaching brand new dungeon masters just how to run it. So, before we look ahead and start looking at the new material that just came out this week, I still haven't gotten it, I want to spend a little time revisiting that original, talking about what made it so important and why it still matters way more than 40 years later. That is insane to me. In the Keep, well, this place wasn't just a backdrop. It was a home base for the whole adventure. Picture a stone stronghold sitting on the edge of civilization. The last safe spot before the wilderness really opens up. That's where your party begins, inside the Keep. You had everything you needed to get started. There was an inn where adventurers could rest, a tavern to swap stories in, a trader for supplies, and a little temple. And of course there were guards keeping an eye on things. What's interesting is that most of the NPCs didn't even have names in the original module. The Castellan, the trader, the innkeeper, they were described by what they did, not who they were. And they gave new dungeon masters a lot of freedom. You could decide who these people were, what they wanted, how they'd react to the players. In a way, the Keep acted like training wheels. It gave players a safe hub to operate out of, while quietly showing new DMs how to handle roleplay, how to set prices, and how to create a sense of community in the game. And once the party felt ready, they'd step outside those gates and head out into the unknown. Like this place. Well, it's unknown, but it looks unknown. And then, of course, once the players left the safety of that keep, that's when the adventure really opened up with the wilderness. The Borderlands were dangerous, and the module, well, made sure you felt that way. The road itself wasn't even guaranteed to be safe. Bandits, wolves, all kinds of creatures could turn up if you wandered too far. What really set it apart, though, was that it didn't point you in one clear direction. There wasn't a big quest marker telling you, this is where you go next. Instead, the players had freedom to explore. Maybe they'd followed a trail through the woods, or climb a ridge, or stumble across something unexpected, something you may have thrown in. And sprinkled throughout that wilderness were these little encounters that gave the world more personality. One of the more famous is the Mad Hermit, a wild old man living out in the woods with his pet mountain lion. Awesome. For a lot of groups, running into him was the first moment they realized, oh, this world is alive. Things can happen outside of the dungeon. And it wasn't just him. The wilderness itself was full of little surprises. There were wandering bands of goblins, scouting orcs, and even a lone gnoll patrol. These encounters, well, they made the world feel alive. Players never knew if they'd stumble across a fight, a negotiation, or just a strange sight along the road. It gave the whole region a sense of a sandbox feel. In a box set, starter. The players weren't following a script, they were choosing their own path. And every group that played the module would end up telling a slightly different story because of it. And then, of course, there were the Caves of Chaos. This was the centerpiece of the whole adventure. A deep ravine filled with cave mouths carved into the cliffs, each one leading to a different monster's lair. For a lot of players, this was their very first real dungeon crawl. The caves weren't just a single dungeon either. They were a network of different factions. Kobolds in one cave, goblins in another, orcs, gnolls, bugbears, even an evil shrine to darker powers, and hidden deeper inside. Each group, well, they had their own little home, And they didn't necessarily get along with each other either. Each cave had its own personality. The kobolds were clever, but weak, often setting traps to even the odds. The bugbears were brutish and aggressive, while the gnolls acted almost like mercenaries, sometimes fighting anybody who crossed their paths. And deep inside the ravine, an evil shrine which added darker, more mysterious element, giving players a taste of real danger and story beyond just rolling dice and swinging some swords. The module really encouraged players to think. Do you rush into a cave, risking traps and ambushes, or do you gather information first, map the area, and maybe even turn one faction against the other? These weren't just fights, they were lessons in resource management, planning and thinking like a team. Even simple things like tracking rations, keeping track of injuries, or remembering which caves you have actually cleared were lessons in game mechanics. The module taught new players and dungeon masters how to handle strategy, combat, and exploration without ever feeling like a lecture, which this kind of sounds like now. And they learned how by playing, and those lessons stuck. That's what made the design so clever. The dungeon master could play the factions off one another. Maybe the goblins hate the kobolds, or the bugbears bully the orcs. The players could charge in swinging swords, or they could try to negotiate. They might even stir up rivalries to make their lives a little bit easier. And the caves, well, of course they were dangerous. Traps, ambushes, narrow tunnels that could turn into death traps if you weren't careful. It forced new players to learn how to plan, how to scout ahead, and how to manage resources. What's wild is that the module didn't tell you which cave to start with. The players choose, and that choice made the whole thing feel even bigger, more open and a little bit more unpredictable. Every run through the Caves of Chaos could play out differently every time, depending on who you fought, who you may have talked to, or what risks you were willing to take. That's what's really fascinating about Keep on the Borderlands, is that it wasn't just an adventure that was teaching, it was a teaching tool. Remember, back in 1979, most people opening the basic set had never played D&D before. So this module had to do more than just provide monsters to fight. It had to quietly show people how the game worked. The Keep taught roleplay, talking to merchants, bargaining with the innkeeper, even dealing with the Castilian's guards. The Wilderness, well, it taught you exploration, mapping, and the idea that danger could be anywhere. And the Caves, well, they taught combat, resource management, and how to make the tough choices. It also showed dungeon masters how to run a world that reacts to the players. Monsters didn't always wait in their rooms for heroes to show up. They would and could fight back, regroup, or call in allies. The factions in the caves made sure of that. So in a way, Keep on the Borderlands was D&D's crash course back then. You didn't sit down and read a guide on how to play. You learned by playing through this adventure. And that's part of why it stuck with so many people over the years. It wasn't just fun, it was informative. The legacy of Keep on the Borderlands is extremely hard to overstate. For a lot of people, this was the first time they ever rolled dice, drew a dungeon map, or played a character. And because it was all included in the basic set, it became one of the most, widely played adventures in D&D history. Its structure, a safe home base, a dangerous wilderness, and a central dungeon full of factions, became a kind of blueprint. You can see echoes of it in countless adventures that came after. Even today, a lot of modern modules still use that same rhythm. It was so influential that Wizards was actually revisiting, and has revisited, Return to Keep on the Borderlands back in 1999, and Goodman Games gave it a deluxe treatment in Into the Borderlands in 2018, reprinting and expanding it for modern players. I love that book, actually. And now the brand new Borderlands box set, it feels like things are coming full circle. A new generation is about to discover the Borderlands for the very first time, just like players did back in 1979. The difference is most of the people today have actually heard what Dungeons & Dragons is. That's why I think it's important to talk about the original, because it's not just an adventure, it's a piece of D&D, Dungeons & Dragons history that helped shape the game into what it is today. So, That is the story behind Keep of the Borderlands in a nutshell. The adventure that introduced a whole generation to Dungeons and Dragons. I'm curious though, have you ever played it? Maybe you started back with the basic set back in the day, or maybe you've only heard about it through reprints and retro talk. Either way, I'd like to hear your stories down in the comments. Personally, I first saw it, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I barely knew how to read, and I loved that book. So with the new box set coming out, it feels like this perfect time to look back to where it all began. Thanks for standing here and listening to me prattle on about this game. I do love it so much. Keep on the Borderlands is a classic. I highly encourage running this game. The newer box set does look very similar to the 3 different books in it as well. You got the Keep, the Wilderness, and the Caves, and it looks pretty well opened up and looks as though it mimics the original's layout pretty well. I'm excited to get into it myself. I'm probably going to watch a review about it later. I don't know who I'll check out, but I'm very curious. I cannot wait to get my hands on it. It'll probably be later this week when I have time. This is break time at work. I'm still prattling on. Anyway, guys, until next time, this is James from the Dungeon Puffin. Later.